Donald Trump hits the road. It's The Art of the Deal, the international edition, starring the Saudis, Qataris, and Emiratis. The Israelis kill yet another Palestinian journalist, and they're not even pretending they didn't mean it this time. Plus, what to make of India's unique media space.
What you were getting was a performance on television, almost a celebration of war, antics, a circus.
The global news media had plenty to report on after the first major international trip of Donald Trump's second term in office, a three-country tour that, at least for now, signaled a strategic pivot toward deeper U.S.-Arab relations. A $142 billion defense contract with Saudi Arabia that, if fulfilled, would amount to the biggest defense deal the world has ever seen. Trump also removed U.S. sanctions on Syria and signaled that he is open to engaging diplomatically with Iran. Conspicuously absent, however, from his itinerary was Washington's closest ally in the region, Israel. That snub fueled speculation in both American and Israeli media over a growing rift between Trump and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. While both sides are out to maintain appearances, a closer reading suggests that their interests are diverging, which does not necessarily mean good news for Palestinians in Gaza. In 19 months of genocide, the U.S. has persistently backed and armed Israel, and there is little indication that that's about to change. Politics is a never-ending blend of the performative and the substantive. And Arab monarchs put on a show when hosting Donald Trump. The president's first foreign trip of his second term featured an aerial escort into the Arabian Gulf. He was paraded around Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE, all decked out in stars and stripes. Gilded halls, chummy hugs, familiar tunes. Except Donald Trump was making news as well.
Trump marking a major shift in U.S. policy towards Syria.
He announced that the U.S. will lift sanctions against Syria, stop bombing Houthi targets in Yemen, and renew efforts at getting the Abraham Accords and the normalization process between Arab states and Israel back on track.
And he looked ahead to the prospect of extending the Abraham Accords to one day normalize relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel.
All while Trump tied up some lucrative trade agreements, including the biggest arms deal in history with Saudi Arabia.
This agreement includes around $142 billion in defense sales, it says.
The elephant in each of those opulent rooms? Gaza, and a genocidal war on Palestinians waged by Israel and backed by the United States.
I mean, what we're witnessing right now on the ground in Gaza is a radical intensification of the forced starvation campaign against the Palestinians of Gaza. More than 2 months, not a grain of wheat, not a pill of medicine, not a bottle of water, no fuel has entered the Gaza Strip. And the United States continues to fully support Israel in its scorched earth terror bombings of the Palestinians of Gaza. And there's this sort of disconnect with then the world of diplomacy and with the rhetoric coming from the Trump administration.
My greatest hope is to be a peacemaker and to be a unifier. I don't like war.
I don't think that President Trump traveled to the Middle East for anything to do with Palestine. And I say this because since the start of his presidency, he has let Netanyahu do whatever it is that he wants to do. The Gulf states are realizing that the stability of the Arab world requires that there be responses to all of these crises that have been created, mostly as a result of Israel. And the way in which they're doing it is they're using the language that Trump understands of both economics while also appealing to his personal side.
Mr. President, I've known you for many years. I know that you're a man of peace. I know that you want to bring peace to this region.
And in the backdrop of all of this, on the Arab street, everyone is wondering, is Trump going to actually do something to halt Israel's genocide?
The other thing to look for on a presidential trip like this one, what didn't happen? No visit to Israel, which Air Force One turned into a flyover state. No Trump meeting with Benjamin Netanyahu. No invitation to the Israelis to join the clandestine meetings between American negotiators and leading members of Hamas. Negotiations currently focused on a possible ceasefire that have already led to the release of the last surviving American citizen held by Hamas, Eden Alexander. Ever since those direct talks began 2 months ago, the Israelis have tried to sabotage them, repeatedly leaking news that those negotiations were taking place. And they've been able to count on Western media outlets like CNN for help.
Joining me now is the man who sat across the proverbial table from Hamas, U.S. hostage.
This exchange took place in March between CNN's Jake Tapper and Trump's Middle East negotiator, Adam Boehler. Tapper started off the interview with precisely the kind of question the Israeli government would want him to ask.
Adam Boehler himself goes on CNN. And the first question that CNN's Jake Tapper asks Adam Boehler is,
as a Jewish American, did you have to steel yourself before sitting down to deal with people who are definitionally anti-Semitic murderers?
That's the first question. You have something extraordinary that's taken place. And CNN's lead anchor decides that the most relevant thing to do is to confront the special envoy on hostages with, what did it feel like to be sitting across from terrorists? This is journalistic malpractice. Boehler himself then pushes back.
Well, I'll say meeting with people, whether they're good people or bad people, is part of my job.
And then grants interviews in Israel, where he is accurately describing what Hamas's position is or vision for a long-term truce with Israel.
Israel had been in conversations with Hamas for many, many years. Even before October 7th, it's very clear that there were direct relationships. The kind of we don't negotiate with Hamas or we don't negotiate with terrorists is completely performative. The fact that Boehler had to defend himself acknowledges that you have to sit to the table when you're negotiating is basic common sense.
I think that a conversation and a dialogue is very important.
But the fact that he has to make such a statement, it shows how deep and how successful really has Israel's campaign of Hasbara been.
Hasbara is the Israeli term for state propaganda. Often, its effectiveness relies on ensuring that only one side of the story, Israel's, gets out. That is why the Netanyahu government leaked out the details of those U.S. officials meeting with Hamas to derail those negotiations, to prevent Hamas from being heard. But when Hamas does get its story out, it can be nothing like what is spread by Israeli Hasbara and echoed by news outlets almost everywhere.
I spoke to the two officials from Hamas that led the direct talks with Adam Boehler, Osama Hamdan and Bassem Naim. And what they described to me was a very positive series of discussions with Adam Boehler that went far beyond the scope of Eden Alexander. And that Hamas had a real sense that for the first time during this genocide, they were sitting across from people representing the United States that actually were interested in ending the war and understanding the root causes of the war. And so from Hamas's perspective, the Israelis were not just leaking this to try to smear or undermine Adam Boehler, but to sabotage the next step in this process, sitting down directly with Hamas and talking about paths to release all captives, but also to end the war.
Any rift, real or imagined, between the Trump administration and the Netanyahu government will make headlines. Discerning news consumers have also detected a clear editorial shift in some influential Western media outlets. On the eve of Trump's trip, news organizations that have long defended Israel's war on Gaza started changing or at least altering their tune. And it's about time.
The world has awoken. We've seen that the Financial Times came out with its editorial calling for an end to the policy of starvation. The Guardian has been publishing pieces similarly. The Economist doing the same. We're also seeing there's now a split within the New York Times and people who are directly calling out Netanyahu. There is a sea change in public opinion. It's just so tragic to me that it took this much destruction, there's so many people being killed, for the world to finally wake up.
There is something about the images of starving children that raises empathy and kind of shocks people. And I mean, one of my favorite quotes is James Baldwin wrote, "The children are always ours, each and every one of them." And the death toll in Gaza shows that this is not always true, but maybe something is cracking and maybe there's something that is changing. And the huge and unimaginable loss of life, and especially the harm done against innocent civilians and especially children, is getting to some people in the halls of power, including the media.
These news organizations, it took them 19 months to wake up to the fact that this is a genocidal war. They didn't just stand silently by. They often helped to manufacture public consent for a genocidal war because of the bravery of Palestinian journalists, because of those news organizations that have refused to just be conveyor belts for the lies and propaganda of the Israeli regime. The truth has come to light. But we should never let the news outlets that played a role in facilitating this to forget this or walk away from it.
The targeted killing this past week of one of Gaza's best-known journalists marked a new low in Israel's systematic campaign to silence the press there. Tariq Nafi is here with more on what happened.
Hassan Islayeh was assassinated by Israeli forces not while working in the field, but as he lay in his hospital bed, where he was recovering from a previous Israeli attack that had left him with serious injuries. Islayeh founded his own news agency and was a prominent figure in Gaza's media scene. His round-the-clock news updates, pictures, videos, and testimonies were widely cited by other journalists and news outlets. His killing, in the deadliest conflict for media workers ever recorded, is part of an effort to eliminate Palestinian journalists by nearly every means possible. We've seen journalists targeted in cars clearly marked press. We've seen them shot and left to bleed out while ambulances were blocked from reaching them, and burned alive in their tents while they were working. The justifications for these acts have also shifted. Where Israel once denied targeting journalists, it now openly admits killing them after branding them Hamas operatives, though it rarely provides any evidence of that. In Islayeh's case, the so-called proof that he belonged to Hamas included a photo with former Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar at an event Islayeh had been covering, as well as his reporting on October 7th. Islayeh denied any political affiliation, insisting he was just doing his job. As Islayeh himself noted, famous Israeli journalists who've embedded with the Israeli military then posted photos of themselves with soldiers in the ruins of Gaza or lounging around in the homes of displaced Palestinians are not treated with the same suspicion. Before his killing, Islayeh said he had been the focus of months of incitement by the Israeli media.
חסן אסלח זה השם שלו, הוא אחד העיתונאים במרכאות כפולות ומכופלות בעזה, הכי מוכרים ברצועת עזה, אפילו המוכר ביותר שבהם, והוא לא רק עיתונאי, והוא יותר ממקורב לחמאס.
It's been chilling to see other journalists being subjected to the same kinds of threats as Islayeh. This week, pro-Israel voices and advocacy groups were inciting against Al Jazeera reporter Hind Khudari, trying to turn her into Israel's next target.
Thanks, Tariq. It has been a week now since India and Pakistan edged away from the brink of war. Leaders in both countries have declared victory, military and moral. However, questions remain about significant aspects of what has actually gone down. Next week, we will be analyzing the fallout in Pakistan. This time around, we're looking at India, specifically its media ecosystem. It is loud, populated by hundreds of mainstream news channels, many of them notorious for their jingoism, sensationalism, and their ability to produce hate speech, all of which came to the fore as tensions rose between the two countries. Many of India's alternative media outlets, a number of them founded and staffed by refugees from the mainstream space, have tried to fill the void. But their reach does not compare with bigger, better-funded corporate outlets. Just how pivotal might this moment prove to be for the Indian mainstream media? We're speaking with Hartosh Singh Bal. He is the executive editor at one of India's most reputable alternative news outlets, Caravan Magazine. Mr. Bal, thank you for speaking with us here at the Listening Post today. For the past few weeks, Indians have been very vocal with their anger against Pakistan, and that is unsurprising. But so many Indians have also been quite upfront with their anger against their own mainstream news media. What is behind that anger?
You have to understand that even at the best of times, the Indians take their mainstream media with not a pinch but a bag full of salt. Since there is a lot of popular support for Mr. Modi, when the skew is in favor of Mr. Modi, all it causes is amusement. But this was not one of those times. As the war was unfolding in real time, their only choice was to turn to television, to mainstream media, to find out what is happening. This was a moment of tension, of concern for every Indian. And at this point of time, what they were getting was misinformation, an attempt to deceive. At the same time, what you were getting was a performance on television, almost a celebration of war, antics, a circus. When you combine this with the actuality of what people were experiencing, that anger was very, very natural, and it hasn't totally faded away.
Can you give us a sense of some of the editorial red lines that have emerged in the coverage of this story? The taboo topics, what sorts of punishments have been meted out to some alternative media outlets that haven't towed the line? Now the tensions have simmered down a little bit. What kinds of issues still remain off limits?
So I think you can get a fair idea of what the taboos are by just the Indian official briefings, which, unlike the Indian media, were quite informative, but left out certain details about the damage that was inflicted or is perceived to have been inflicted on the Indian side. In particular, what happened to some Indian aircrafts during the first strike on Pakistan. It was an article exactly on this, which was referring to a CNN article, which is still available, that was run by the outlet The Wire. The entire website was taken down without due process, and the outlet was restored only after that particular article was removed. That's a clear idea of the kind of red lines that still exist. This concern has still not been addressed in any of the Indian mainstream channels or newspapers about what may have happened on that first day of the Indian airstrike in terms of any damage inflicted to India. That's a clear red line. You're not supposed to mention it. You're not supposed to examine it. You're not supposed to ask questions about it.
The Modi government has had more than 10 years now to shape much of India's modern media landscape. We've seen major outlets being bought out by big businesses with vested political interests, political allies of the BJP taking journalists to court. The price to pay for holding the government to account can be high there. But over these past few weeks, would it be fair to say that mainstream TV outlets have actually been liabilities for the Modi government? And if so, in what way?
Both in popular perception and for anybody looking into India from the outside, this would be clear. The exaggeration, the hype, the expectations placed on the Modi government actually boxed it into a strategic corner from which it was not able to take itself out. Quite clearly, the government's hands in terms of the actions they could have taken have also been forced by the kind of media coverage they have engineered over a decade. This is a continuation of everything this government has been promoting for the last 10 years. But the government itself does not see it in this fashion, despite the questions that were raised about Indian propaganda because of the media rather than what was said in the official briefing. There was a huge amount of skepticism. But for some reason, this government does not see it as damage, while it is clear to everybody else that it has been very damaging.
And evidence of the government's view of this comes from seeing the BJP, Modi's party, decidedly backing those television news outlets. Here's an excerpt from a video that the government pushed out on social media.
भारत का मीडिया ये बता रहा था कि पाकिस्तान मार खा रहा है, पिट रहा है और भारतीय सेना के शौर्य के बारे में हम आपको बता रहे, तब भारतीय मीडिया को ही एक कोऑर्डिनेटेड अटैक करके टारगेट कर दिया। एक इकोसिस्टम ने ऐसा भयंकर माहौल बना दिया कि भारतीय मीडिया तो सब गलत दिखा रहा। दिक्कत ये थी कि कई राष्ट्रवादी लोग भी इस नैरेटिव में फंस गए।
Quite clearly, the reason that the BJP endorses that media landscape, the reason why it has come out so much in support of it is what has shaped the last 10 years. This is the media outlet that has been both used to bolster the government, but it has also been used to cut down, criticize, and attack all those who question any propaganda narrative. It is directed against those who questioned, wanted to know the truth, wanted to analyze, wanted to weigh where we stand, wanted to understand what the government's strategic interests were. And this is signaled by what is happening in other parts of the media. In a recent article, a journalist very close to the BJP in a centrist outlet actually wrote a piece which said that we are fighting a war on 2.5 fronts. The 2 fronts are Pakistan and China. The half front is the people inside who are asking questions, people who supposedly are weakening India from within by asking questions, by posing questions about what the government wants to do, what it wanted as an aim in this war. All those people are as much the enemy as Pakistan or China are. And this is the narrative the BJP is endorsing through videos like this.
Now, Mr. Ball, I realize that you don't track Pakistani media that closely. I don't think any Indian would have the time. You have more than 400 television news channels domestically to keep an eye on. But Pakistani media, over the coverage of this story, have had some failings as well. What's your take on the Pakistani coverage of this conflict and how it compares to what you're seeing at home in India?
The Pakistan media parrots the Pakistan government line totally. And in Pakistan's case, you were getting misinformation and spin and fake news from the official briefings itself. At no point, even in small alternative outlets in Pakistan, did you get any questions asked. So we had this misinformation war, basically, that was going on.
What do you think happens from this point on in the coverage of this story, Mr. Ball? Do you see any changes coming in the way mainstream media outlets in India cover the news as a result of what we've seen over the past 2 weeks? Or are you just resigned to the fact that we're going to see more, if not more, of the same?
Well, we aren't certainly resigned. We will rage against it, but I do not expect anything to change. The kind of damage that has been done to journalism itself in India because of this kind of media is going to continue. And it will continue not only because the Modi government wants it so, it is also because these values of propaganda have been internalized in the media landscape itself. This is here to stay.
Hartosh Singh Ball, executive editor at Caravan Magazine, thank you so much for speaking with us here at the Listening Post today.